I told my friends not to book the cruise as it was one that I keep warning cruisers to stay well clear of because they almost always disappoint. But they insisted, and sadly, 3 days before they were due to depart, what I feared would happen did. It was cancelled. I'm Gary Bembridge and I'm here to warn you about this and 5 other cruises I suggest you never book, along with tips of what to do instead or how to reduce your risk if you really do want to do them. My friends really wanted to become one of the group of cruisers that go on brand new ship maiden voyages. They wanted to be the first to stay in a cabin and to experience all the new onboard facilities before everybody else, and they want to do that on Sun Princess. Now, I pointed out to them that at the time they were looking at booking, of the last 10 new cruise ships launching, only 3 sailed their original planned maiden voyage. The 7 others were cancelled because the ships were not ready, throwing the plans of cruisers into absolute chaos. In fact, on Sun Princess, they not only cancelled the original maiden voyage, but the replacement one too. And this is the one that my friends were booked on. The ship was still not ready and their cruise was cancelled with only 3 days notice. But cruises being cancelled is not the only reason to avoid maiden voyages. There are actually 3 more reasons to steer clear of them. First of all, you are not the first to stay in that cabin nor try out those facilities. Lines run a series of voyages called shakedown cruises after they've actually taken delivery of the ship. And before the maiden voyage sails with paying guests, they run these cruises. The lines run them first with employees and then with invited media and travel agents. Now, I've been on several shakedown cruises over the years because one of the advantages of being based in Europe, where pretty much all cruise ships are built, is they mostly ask people close by to go on them. Second, and more important, things in my experience do not run smoothly on Maidens. It's a brand new ship and it's the first time with a full complement of passengers, as the shakedown cruises usually run with about half capacity. The Maiden is the first time everything gets tried out at full capacity. Now remember, every single crew member is also new to the ship and no one is used to the systems, nor they've had time to form a smooth, kind of well-oiled working team. On any maiden voyage I've been on in the past, there's also been workmen from the shipyard finishing things off, and some venues have not even been open. So Sun Princess, when it sailed, all venues still weren't open. The shows are still being finalized and rehearsed. And again, as many found on the much delayed Sun Princess, which had none of the big production shows ready, even by the time they ran that fateful and new maiden voyage. The systems are stress tested and struggles often. Meals can be slow, they can be chaotic. And again, as people on Sun Princess found on the delayed maiden voyage, service was really slow. Every review I've ever seen of maiden voyages is about how frustrated people have been or how things kind of basically need time to bed in. And on top of all of that, it will cost you much, much more to sail on a maiden voyage than going a few months later. They are in high demand and the lines crank up the fares. So to ensure a great experience, I stay clear of maiden voyages and let the ship bed in. My other tip is to look instead at cruising on one of the line's older ships, because when their new ship joins the fleet, they reduce older ship fares because so many cruisers are now looking at booking the new ship. Also, avoid the first cruise when ships are coming out of a dry dock. Ships are required by law to go into a dry dock every few years for safety checks and maintenance, but the lines often use these to make big upgrades to ships. But they could range from simple decor changes, changing the carpets, replacing furniture, like Queen Mary II went through not long before I made this particular video. But they also could go as far as adding whole new decks, putting in solar cabins like Oceania did across their fleet recently, and even cutting the ship in half and extending it like the last ship I was on before making this, which was Silver Spirit, where they did that just exactly a few years back, cut in half, added a whole new section. The lines don't want to take the ship out of service for too long because they'll lose a lot of revenue. So they tend to put ships in dry dock for a very tight amount of time. And all these changes have a really tight schedule. So again, in my experience, ships leave dry dock with things not always finished and not always working well. I learned this the hard way, where I found workmen all over the place on board after one dry dock that MSC Divina went on some years back. There was noise, the smell from fish fresh paint all over, some venues were closed, and again, it just was not a smooth experience. So again, let a sailing or two go by before you book a ship coming out of dry dock. And try and stay clear, by the way, of the last cruise before a ship goes into dry dock, because time's tight, preparation often starts on that last cruise. Things are being whipped out, venues closed, and I saw that firsthand on a Saga Cruises ship once that was about to head into dry dock. So my tip here is about how do you check if a ship is going into dry dock? Well, look at the cruise schedule and see if there's a gap in dates after or before the cruise you're looking at. It could mean that the ship has been chartered, so not on sale to the public, but it's much more likely it's going to be in a dry dock. You can also search for your ship name and the word dry dock in search engines, and some cruise trade press sites like Cruise Ship News list all the scheduled dry dock ships and dates. I avoid peak season cruises in all three of the main cruising regions as well. First, I steer clear of the Mediterranean cruises in the peak summer months of July and August, not only because it gets so very hot and sticky, but many ports that you go to and visit places like Rome, Venice, Barcelona, Pisa, Florence are absolutely packed with both land and cruise passengers. It's terrible for sightseeing. It's not very enjoyable. Next, in the Caribbean, I avoid the peak March spring break, especially on the big resort type ships, because they get packed, can have a crazy party crowd, and I feel that all those stories of arguments and fights breaking out seem to be happening around about this time. I personally avoid also the peak Caribbean Christmas cruises because personally I prefer more kid-free cruise, and you find even lines like Cunard and Holland America that generally have an older couple crowd are usually packed with families and multi-generational groups. I've been on those at Christmas with 400 to 500 kids, so it's just not for me. Of course, if that is what you're looking for, to travel with kids, grandkids, extended family, then actually this is good news because there are lots of options and it's going to be very buzzy. In Alaska too, in the peak July and August months, I found the lines tend not to attract the usual profile because again, families, not surprisingly, choose lines with the right places they call on in Alaska. So places like, and lines like Holland America and Princess, because they are two of the very limited lines that actually go into the must-see Glacier Bay. So again, it's not a typical experience and the ships are much more crowded, so I avoid those. Instead, my tip for all the three main cruising regions, the Caribbean, the Mediterranean and Alaska, is to look at cruises in what's known as the shoulder months to the peak season. So let me give some examples. So in the Mediterranean and Alaska, that's kind of late May, June, and kind of September going into October, which also, by the way, is usually much cheaper too. The next one is one that I often have arguments with some cruise writers, bloggers and vloggers about, but I stay well clear of the short 2 and 3 night taster cruises that many cruise lines run. Now, they used to be really helpful for first-time cruisers to try cruising and for cruisers considering trying a new line to see if they were a good match for that line. But now they've kind of changed and they don't really work for that. First of all, ships are getting bigger. They have way more facilities to try, and there's simply not enough time to properly experience it and draw any meaningful conclusions, especially if those cruises are calling on ports. You just don't have time to really get the feel. Secondly, the lines often run a limited range of activities, so you can't really judge that whole experience that you're going to get fully. But thirdly, and most important of all, you won't experience the usual line because they attract people that's not atypical, because they're often run over holiday weekends at really good prices, and I feel they've become basically a cost-effective party booze trip. This is really great, of course, if you're looking for that, but it's not going to be that representative of what the cruise is normally. So we stopped taking our mums on these. They loved going on Cunard, but we found the short Cunard trips started to be more party, less typical Cunard experience that they loved, so we kind of moved away from them. Now, my tip is if you do want to try one of these short taster cruises, look for those that are run out of holiday periods and ideally midweek, because they tend to be less booze cruise and more typical of the cruise line. Another cruise I stay clear of is when there are themed cruises that I'm not going to be a part of. Groups and clubs increasingly are running themed cruises on cruise ships. They could be themed around, say, I don't know, motorcycle enthusiasts, Star Trek, Game of Thrones, boy bands, or even down to niches like knitting, crafting, and so on. Now, while some have become so big, like Star Trek, that they tend to charter now whole ships, many of these themed cruises will just take a big block booking. However, Venues across the ship will be closed to regular cruise passengers at various times, those that are not part of the themed group. So facilities like bars, nightclubs, or the theatre will be closed at certain times, and there may be special events going on that you're basically not allowed to attend. I've had so many people contact me saying once they're on board, they found themselves with hordes of bikers, sci-fi fans, even doctors' conferences and so on, based on what the themed cruise was. And it's made it less enjoyable experience for them because they felt kind of shut out from many things. There are also times when companies are running a conference or a big sales incentive on a cruise. I was on a Regent cruise in the Caribbean, and a large finance company was doing a really big conference, and so many venues were often closed for their events, and even some of the events that were normally popular, like Captain's Welcome Party, were poorly attended because they were all off at their corporate event. Now, it's harder to check if your cruise is going to be par chartered for one of those because the lines don't make that clear on the side or on their brochures. So the simplest way I've found is to put the name of the ship and the departure date and the word group cruise into a search engine. And if there is a theme or group cruise on that, it'll usually bring up the web page for that themed cruise. Now, let me give you a simple example. If you put the dates and ship of my group cruises, when I've got my group cruises running, they show up as having my groups on those cruises. If you're a traveler that worries about or tends to have high risk of seasickness and want to minimize the risk of not being able to use outer decks or missing ports due to weather issues, then there are some cruises that I strongly recommend you avoid as well. The one affecting most people are those in the Caribbean hurricane season, which officially runs right from the 1st of June all the way to the 30th of November. Although the exact paths of individual hurricanes, of course, are hard to predict, the riskiest part of the season is generally kind of mid-August to mid-September. That is really the kind of the peak time. Hurricanes and the storms around them can lead to definitely rougher seas, often changes in their itinerary, occasionally being delayed getting back into port, which has a knock-on effect of missing flights and so on. Cruises to the Norwegian fjords, for example, also late in the season and in winter, which run them because that's a great chance of seeing the northern lights. Often they will face pretty rough seas. Of course, there are others like the winter North Atlantic crossings, which is one of the very first trips I ever did on Cunard with. It had massive waves crashing over the bow of the ship. Crossing the Drake Passage to Antarctica, of course, is another one. Going around Cape Horn is another one. So if you worry about seasickness or the chance of a lot of disruption, definitely avoid cruises that are going to have a high chance of weather or stormy seas. If you want to know, though, the cruises I do recommend as must-dos, then join me over in this video where I start by explaining why the 3 most popular cruises in the world are actually not on the must-do list. And you'll find out why. See you over there.